Reddit, what's your family's we could have been rich story? When Subway was just starting to become known to the general public, my parents were offered to get into the business for a very cheap price. They turned it down because they wanted to take me, was about 6 at the time, to Myrtle Beach instead that summer. Was not worth it. Myrtle Beach is the gift that keeps on giving, so at least you have that. My grandfather helped with construction on Disney World. He was offered either stock or a lump sum. They didn't particularly need the money, but my grandmother wanted to order something expensive out of a catalog, so they took the cash. Thanks, Grandma. I don't know which of the hundreds of useless, never used knickknacks it was, but I'm sure it was well worth the millions your stock would have been worth today. My, now deceased, grandfather was approached by the two makers of Trivial Pursuit, before they had made the game, who he worked with, and they asked him for $1,000 as an investment. He said nope. My grandmother then proceeded to tell him that he should have invested. That didn't change his mind. Damn it, Grandpa. How interesting. I knew one of the creators of TP, now passed away I believe. He wasn't a particularly nice man as far as I was told. Two brothers owned a lot of oil land. That is land with oil in it. One of them did not think there was any future in oil and sold his share to the other. Guess which one I am descended from? Here is a hint I have to work for a living. One of them did not think there was any future in oil. Surely no one will be driving cars in a few years. Back in the late 90s early zeros, my dad thought that internet pornography was going to be a huge cash cow and wanted to quit his job to design what are basically the tube sites of today. My mom was like, we have 2 kids in elementary school, WTF. So he didn't do it. Your dad sounds like a forward thinker. My great grandfather owned a small soda company in NYC. Coca-Cola offered to incorporate it into their business. He said no because he wanted to keep it a family business. My family was descended from high-ranking government officials in the Qing dynasty. My great-grandparents owned multiple houses in the center of Beijing. There were chests filled with gold and jade in our houses. Then the Cultural Revolution hit and everything was taken away. Out of fear, my great-uncle dumped chests full of gold in the nearby river. Relative of mine was once offered an opportunity to invest in a coffee shop chain. Back when they were about to expand into my country. When he saw the prices, he asked who is going to pay $10 for a cup of coffee. Turns out a lot of people like Starbucks. I have a similar one. My uncle was asked to be one of the original investors for McDonald's, but he turned it down. My great grandparents moved to Australia. We live in the UK and bought a silver mine and land for a banana plantation. One year the banana plantation failed and all the money from the silver mine was put into the next year's crops. Next year the crops failed again and they were broke. They sold the land of the banana plantation to raise funds to get back to the UK where my granddad grew up. To this day the silver mine still technically belongs to us as it was never sold and the family name has stayed the same. The unfortunate thing is we have virtually no idea where in Australia it is. And Australia is pretty freaking huge. We know that it is near Brisbane. That's about it. If we magic up some paperwork we could possibly find the mine and run a really profitable business. But we can't. To be honest, this is just the story I've been told my whole life by my family. It could be complete and utter balls. Dude, all land in Queensland has been converted to Torrens title. Go search the registries. A search should cost like $20. It's not possible to lose land in Queensland. This is what happened to my father, albeit before I was born. So had this happened, I probably wouldn't exist today. Instead of money, my father got the richness of me and my brother. My dad used to be a manager for Rent-A-Center in the 70s. He was dang good at it too. He managed a tough store in South Boston, the war zone. He has tons of crazy stories about being held at gunpoint, having a hit placed on him by someone he fired, etc. But one day he told me this and my jaw dropped. One day after work, he gets visited by a local general manager of supply stores. Nothing big. This guy comes in and says, "So I've heard about you, and I wanted to talk to you about an opportunity. I'm planning on opening a new store for office supplies, and need a good manager to start with. I can't pay you what you make now, but we'll give you a % and raises as the company grows." My dad is in his 20s, making $60K. which is a lot of money back then. He tells the guy he just can't walk away from what he has and can't take that chance. That man that spoke to my father, Thomas Stemberg, co-founder of Staples. Imagine what even 2% of that could have been. Oh well, now he's got us. TLDR. Father turns down opportunity to be first manager, with party of the company, of what would become Staples. Older, colder, shoulder. In your 20s and no kids is the perfect time to take that risk. My dad, not long after my parents divorced, got 5 out of 6 numbers on the lottery. He chose number 44 and the number picked was 45. He got £50,000. But it was so close to so much more. Would have been a massive haha frick you to my mum at the time. My grandma is a religious lottery ticket player and always uses our birthdays as her numbers. One time, she got all the numbers right but one. She missed 27. It's because my birthday is on the 28th. Sorry, grandma. When I was in college I was working for UPS before they went public, so back in 9600 anyway. I had worked there long enough that I was eligible for buying stock before it was offered publicly and at a huge discount. My parents and I talked and agreed they would lend me $75k to buy as much stock as I could get with that amount. Then after it went public, pay them back the money with a tip and the rest would be mine for school, home, car, whatever. Well, they drug their feet on it and I missed the boat. There were employees that made so much money they quit on the spot the day it went public. I have never done the calculations but I am sure I missed out on at least 500k. What the heck, you Machine 01 as parents. The hundreds of colorful stuffed animals with heart-shaped tags sitting in tubs in my parents' attic probably have a relevant story to tell, but I doubt it's the only one here. Back in the 1960s, very few cars had air conditioners in them. The ones that did were either factory installed in luxury brands like Cadillac, or aftermarket ones that would hang under the dashboard. The latter were more reliable than the former, but not by much. My dad recognized this as a growth market and went to the local community college to study refrigeration. Before long, his little repair shop was the go-to for people needing help keeping their ACs running. He also became a franchise dealer installer for one of the major aftermarket AC companies at the time. People would come from miles around to get their ACs fixed. Dealerships with a complex problem would sub out their work to him. There was seemingly a steady stream of new or almost new cars in and out of his shop. It was a pretty big deal back in the day. One day, my dad tells me that he was approached by a big 3 manufacturer, GM, I think, to basically run their in-car AC operations. By then, he knew more about how the things worked than the guys who were designing them. They offered him a big salary and were going to cover his expenses to move to Michigan. I don't know how much, but by 1960s standards, pretty huge, I guess. He turned it down. I asked him why. He said something about he didn't want us kids to be brought up in that lifestyle. Geez, I dunno. Dad, you could have checked with us on that one first. But that's what he ended up doing. Eventually, the manufacturers got their AC designs sorted out without him. All of the dealerships and repair shops learned how to fix ACs on their own, and his aftermarket business dried up. But it was fun while it lasted. Dang, that's kind of crappy. You can still be loaded and not live lavishly with a little self-control. I'm peeved for you, lol. My mom knew Mrs. Portillo when they just had a couple hot dog stands. My dad could have invested in their first full restaurant. If you're not from Illinois, look up Portillo's. Best food ever. A double burger and a vanilla shake. Be right back shipping over some Portillos to Brazil. My dad owned IBM stock, 500 shares, back in the 70s. He sold it when he doubled his money. Edited for too many zeros. My father-in-law did something similar with Microsoft. My great-grandfather owned a small grocery store in upstate New York. He was approached to help another competing grocery store expand and he turned it down to maintain his own. That competing grocery store is now worth billions and has a cult following in most northeastern states. It starts with a W. Goddammit, do I love Wegmans. Back in the 2006-ish, in the height of the Iraq War, my dad got a tip that there were a bunch of people, soldiers especially, converting their money to Iraqi money because once the US pulled out, their economy would skyrocket and their money would be close to what the US dollar is, so he exchanged $500 for $500,000 IQD. Today, that $500,000 IQD is worth $429 and 93 cents. Now it's in a safe just collecting dust. Every once in a while he brings it out and says, "Man, I could move to Iraq and be a half a millionaire." I guess he still has hopes that it's going to make a comeback, but for now it's just a novelty for him. TLDR. Dad invested Iraqi money when it was really low to the US dollar, hoping it would bounce back. It's even lower now. I remember holding out on buying some bitcoins because the price had just jumped from $2 to $4. I thought, frick that, I'll wait till it comes back down. It never did. A few friends and I almost went in on a dedicated miner in 2012. We just ran the numbers of how much we would have made in 1 year. My family used to be rich in the Philippines. My grandfather had a huge gambling problem though. They went from having multiple houses to living in Daly City. Ain't nobody want to live in Daly City. I guess my family could have continued to be rich. I grew up in Daly City. Can confirm this story as everyone there is Filipino and knows each other and doesn't want to live there. They all want to move to the inner sunset. My dad wanted to invest in Microsoft in the early 90s and in Apple when rumors first started swirling that Jobs was coming back. Those were literally the only 2 times he was ever right, though, so nobody would trust him with the money. Before I was born, when my parents lived out west, they had invested in a friend's business. He was working on some sort of male contraceptive. His company was going nowhere. Like 5 years later, their investment was worth about the same as when they'd initially invested. They were moving to the other side of the country soon and didn't want to try to keep tabs on this investment anymore, so they cashed out. A few years later, the guy's stock value grew significantly. I don't know if he sold a patent or just finally got his contraceptive into the right market or what. And it wasn't like we would have been millionaires, but they would have made $50,000 or so on their initial investment of a couple thousand. Since it wasn't something that impacted their lives that much, I didn't hear this story until my dad told me about it a couple years ago. Geez dad, sounds like you shouldn't have pulled out. Well, last time I didn't pull out, I got stuck with you. My family owned one of those Pintos that could explode in a minor accident. Sure enough, some driver hit the car from behind, but a passing truck driver had a fire extinguisher and got my sister, my mom, and me out of the car safely, even though he suffered a second-degree burn on one arm. 40 years later, my dad still wonders what he could have done with the product liability lawsuit money if it weren't for that dang truck driver. My grandfather and Charles Schultz both were students at an art school in St. Paul. Wiki makes me think it is Art Instruction Inc., but I'm not positive. Before Schultz was drafted into military, apparently they were pretty decent friends, and when my grandfather showed Schultz pictures of his 2-year-old kids, my aunt and uncle, Schultz decided to draw some cartoons for them. So, pretty much every day for the next few months my grandfather would take home original Peanuts character drawings, give them to his kids, let them color all over them and then throw them away. Nowadays original Peanuts artwork can be worth anything between $750 to $450,000. We were given dozens of them. My grandfather was a cattle broker, commodities trader and businessman living in Wichita, KS in the 1950s and 60s. He was offered a significant share in Pizza Hut by its founders at the outset of the venture. Unfortunately, he did not think that pizza would ever take off as a fast food option, so he declined. As it turns out, people really like pizza. My grandfather did actually manage to get quite rich from cattle and commodities, but he could have done much better as founding investor in Pizza Hut. My family seems to be cursed to almost win huge sums of money. My granddad played the pools every week except for the week my gran forgot to post it for him and he would have won. Years later my cousin didn't play the lottery one week because he was on holiday and his numbers came up. Then in 2009 a friend bought me £23 worth of bitcoins, which would be worth hundreds of thousands, if not millions now, but by the time I realized how valuable they are I'd wiped my computer. When my grandparents died, They were going to divide their assets equally between the grandchildren. There are 8 of us. My uncle didn't like that my mother owned 4 of the grandchildren, and he only had 1. So he let the government take it. The amount $8 million. I missed out on a personal $1 million. My uncle is a dong. I don't think an uncle can just decide to do that. My dad was at a pub in Toronto on Halloween 1997. He was drinking when this guy came up to him dressed up like Austin Powers and started talking to him. He bought a couple rounds. My dad was joking around with him and doing impressions. The guy says he's Mike Myers. My dad says frick off. You're not Mike fricking Myers. Cue my dad arguing with this guy about who he is and joking with him some more. The guy starts telling my dad he's hilarious and that he can help him out with a comedy career if he wants. He was really adamant about wanting to work with him. My dad just says yeah sure buddy, like I believe that. They parted on amicable terms and my dad stumbled home. The next day he goes back to that pub for dinner with a friend and the bartender says to him, "Hey, you're that guy who was talking to Mike last night. Isn't he awesome?" Finally my dad realized that it was the real Austin freaking Powers he was drinking with. He left that bar and never returned. Freaking Christ dad, you could have been a freaking comedy star. All that money because he's terrible with recognition. So your dad missed out on a chance to be a comedy star because he didn't recognize Mike Myers, who just so happened to be at the same Halloween party in Toronto in none other than an Austin Powers costume. Sounds like some far-fetched over-exaggerated dad story to me. When I was 10, McDonald's had a Scrabble game promotion. Get the letters, win the prize. So we collected and got all the letters for a trip to Disney, except my mom lost the letter E. We called it Gone to Disney, folks. Dimsy. My grandmother's family was as filthy rich. Our family isn't because grandma married my grandfather, a poor, uneducated farmer. Grandma's parents hated grandpa, so grandma was cut out of the inheritance. Grandma is a badass then. Edit. I hate is when parents control their children with money. Bit late to this, but my father was offered a good portion of land by his grandmother before she passed away. He was going to accept it, but his father decided it wasn't a good idea. Turns out the field had loads of minerals underneath it that was part of Tara mines and was worth around €100 million after it was all dug up. Needless to say, he was slightly pissed off when I found out about this. My mother inherited about 150 acres from her grandfather down in Louisiana. It was about 10 miles off of the Tuscaloosa Marine Shale. We could have been rolling it. Dad owned shares of the football team Tottenham Hotspur. Sold them in the 90s when he could have kept them for the summer of 2010. A great uncle was a North Dakota oil millionaire in the early 1900s. He died with no heirs, and he left it all to the US government. It was intended to help with the war effort, World War I. Had he left it to siblings, I might be benefiting from it today. My great grandfather had a friend who owned a McDonald's right when then we're starting up. He offered my great grandfather a partnership, but he turned it down because $100 was too much to invest for him back in the 40s. My dad could have bought hundreds of shares, but my mom said no because she thought a company named Google wouldn't be successful. Similar story, my econ teacher told us about the job offers her husband had way back when. One company was offering a decent salary, the other was offering a lower salary but plenty of stock. Understandably, he chose the first one, Gaia Online. The second company was Google. My mother was approached by a company claiming oil was under her grandfather's land, gorgeous farmland a couple counties away. If allowed to dig, my mom would get a good deal of money from the oil. After deliberation with her siblings, they decided to let them dig. They didn't find any oil and the land is now a mess. Not sure where you're from, but in the oil-rich territory I'm in, the oil company will usually pay you upfront to prospect for oil and then more upfront to dig and the royalties from the production. Sounds like you got hosed. My biological father used to clean out attics for a fee and would sell the stuff. Apparently he used eBay right in the beginnings and was offered stock really cheap. Every time he logs in he mumbles about all the money he could have made. My dad once worked with his cousin importing exposting fish food, was a small company at the time, and my dad gave up his half to do something else. Company went on to be worth many millions. I heard stories a while back my family owned a significant portion of Long Island, NY. My family was wealthy around 1500s or so. Their wealth began to drain, so they moved here in the 1600s. We owned several farms, a couple mansions, a homestead, 1/3 RD of the Tudor patent. I know of 2 family cemeteries on Long Island. Sold a well-known island to NYC in the early 1900s, I think it was. Today I sit broke working 2 jobs hoping for my big break to come. No significant pieces of property remain in the family that I know of. If only there was a developer or architect in the family. This isn't just lucky break in a stocks money rich, this is like significant Vanderbilt type rich and power that was missed. My family immigrated to the US during the potato famine in Scotland, hoping for a better life. Well, skip a few generations and my great-great-grandfather gets a letter from Scotland. He inherited a castle and large estate after someone died. However, no one in my family was able to afford a boat back to Scotland to claim it. I guess it went to the government? I don't know. My great uncle still has a copy of said letter. I assume it gives the details, and one day, when I can afford to go visit and see Scotland, I'm going to go get the letter from my great uncle and see if I can't track down the castle my family would have inherited. It's my dream. That's my story, except we were kicked out of France and couldn't afford the back taxes on the castle. Back around 2008 I got into Bitcoin mining. I spent $10,000 on server equipment and ran them in a spare bedroom. At the time, the price was $20. A month later, the price dropped to $15. And at that rate I was only breaking even with the costs of electricity. So I pulled the plug and lost money instead of speculating on the price going up. A few years later, the price shot up to $200. I could have been a millionaire if I had stuck with it. Buddy, the price went way higher than just $200. My grandfather was a player for the NFL back in the early 50s, before the sport had millions of dollars in it. He would travel the county playing football and barely getting paid. Had he been born 10 years later, we'd be rolling in his football money. That's not really how it works. Those guys spend their money, and usually have to be an insurance agent or some crap for the rest of their lives. Back when the internet was just becoming big, my dad ran an online store selling computer hardware and software and ran a BBS. Basically a forum today. Back then most people paid to join BBSs and people were buying a lot from him. Him and a couple other little companies ended up being sued by Microsoft because Microsoft was trying to be a monopoly at the point, I guess. The case never went to trial and nothing became of it, but that and the fact he was making enough money to support 2 kids and a wife shows that he could have made something. I'm not sure of the details as I was really young. I think around 3 or 4, but this was the time my mother went off the handle, ruined his business and separated. My mom has some psychological issues and went off her meds and stopped seeing doctors. They both ended up getting into really hard drugs and that was that. My dad's business never recovered. Also, my great uncle was a cult leader in Waco, Texas and has a lot of money hidden somewhere. I say was because he's dead now, so that money is gone. Oh, and my uncle is kind of David Koresh or something. Man, the weather is nice today. Back around the time Tim Hortons was starting to be built, my dad was asked about going in on a co-ownership of one, but he declined as he didn't see it being a good investment. Boy, was he wrong, haha. My late great aunt won the Win $1 Million Every Year of Your Life contest from Publisher Clearinghouse about a year after she had passed. We found the letter in her mailbox before the house was sold. The promotion said that, had she been alive, she could have given the award to a member of her family. So have someone call up PCH and say, in an old lady voice, I bequeath this to my family. Now I think I'm going to go die now. Bye. And then act all shocked when they show up at your door. If you are new to the channel, you can subscribe. I publish new videos every day. Until then, check another video. Bye for now.